The war had already ended, then humanity called the galaxy's most feared species back. The transmission came through on a frequency that no one outside the Dravik fleet had any business knowing. I was composing the extinction index entry for humanity when the signal hit my command console. 30 words on the screen and a cursor that kept blinking like it was waiting for something I did not own. 11 years of war, and I still had not closed the file. Every civilization that ends under Dravik arrival gets an entry. The format does not bend. 43 words, maximum. No sentiment. No interpretation. A civilization is measured by what it built, how long it held against us, and what it said when the end came. Humanity had said nothing at the end. Because the end had not come. The ceasefire was 4 hours old. The Galactic Council had transmitted the terms while I stood at the observation deck of my flagship watching the last battle signatures dissolve from the star charts. The war had run 11 years, consumed 3 major fleet engagements, and crossed 7 star systems. It ended in a document transmitted by committee. 847 index entries behind me, each one clean, each one closed, none of them had ended in committee paperwork. This one would not close at all. My second-in-command, Thrashcovel, stood 3 meters behind me without speaking. The Dravik do not speak into silence without a reason. Silence is information. His silence told me the fleet was executing the withdrawal in sequence, every protocol running correctly, every crew member adjusting to the cessation order as a simple change of variable. An adjustment to make, nothing more. I had been trying to adjust for 4 hours. I deleted 2 more words from the entry. 28 now. I tried a different structure. Still wrong. I had attempted this entry since year 8 of the war, and every draft I produced came out incomplete, as if the classification system I had used without error for 6,000 years had run into a subject it could not file correctly. Then the signal arrived. It came through on a Dravik internal fleet frequency. Not a council diplomatic band. Not any open channel. An internal frequency, the kind reserved exclusively for communication between Dravik vessels, encrypted at the 3rd harmonic. Our own intelligence teams require 4 full operating cycles to decode the 3rd harmonic without the key. For any species operating outside the Dravik military structure, that level of encryption is not a challenge. It is a wall with no door in it. The message was 11 words. Written in my language. Grammatically exact. You left before we could give you what you are owed. No sender identification. Return coordinates, a planet designated Earth. 3rd orbit around a yellow star in a quiet sector. Population 9 billion. I had been maintaining their index entry since year 1 of the war. Status, open. I read the message 9 times. Each reading produced the same result. Thrashcovel, who had served under my command for 40 years without once hesitating before speaking, paused. He asked whether he should alert the command chain. I said no. He asked whether I intended to respond. I looked at the 28 words on my screen. The cursor blinking. I said, send acknowledgement. We are setting course for Earth. He paused again. Shorter this time. Then the order went through the fleet. On the navigation display, 17 Galactic Council vessels that had been monitoring our withdrawal began to move. They ran the same calculation every species runs when the Dravik change direction without a stated reason. The calculation has always had one answer. Do not stand between the Dravik and wherever they are going. In 6,000 years, that answer had never been wrong. The vessels pulled back one by one, in order of how quickly each crew completed the math, until the path ahead was open and nobody had said a single word about it. I closed the diplomatic channels and told Thrashcovel to hold formation at current speed. Then I went through the war records. All 11 years. Every human engagement I had logged, every tactical report, every fleet movement filed under their index number. I had been thorough. The Dravik are always thorough. But I was not looking for tactical information now. I was looking for the moment when a species in the middle of a war it appeared to be losing had found the means to learn Dravik 3rd harmonic cipher encryption. I went through the complete record twice. I did not find the moment. What I found instead were 11 anomaly flags I had placed on human tactical behavior across the span of the war and never followed up on. In every significant engagement, the human forces had fought as if they were protecting time. Not buying time for retreat. Not covering a withdrawal. They were buying time for something happening behind their own lines, something the tactical data never showed me, because I had never looked for it. I had noted the pattern 11 separate times. Filed it under unusual. Moved on. Not this time. In year 3, my fleet had cut through 7 human supply lines as part of a standard denial operation. Among the items we intercepted were sealed nutrition canisters flagged for routing toward Dravik vessels at the forward edge of the campaign. I had logged them at the time as captured stores. Origin, unverified. I ran the origin verification now. Earth. Manufactured on Earth. The nutritional profile was calibrated to Dravik biology. Not approximately calibrated. Precisely. To a degree of accuracy that required either a living Dravik specimen for direct testing or an exceptionally long period of careful observation from a very significant distance, using only passive data available through monitoring Dravik behavior from far outside contact range. Those canisters had been routed through a transfer point that had no operational reason to know my fleet was in that sector. They had been feeding us. During the war. While we were advancing toward their home system. They had been routing nutritionally precise food into our supply chain through channels they should not have known existed, for reasons that did not fit any model of survival behavior I had ever catalogued. I sat with that information for a long time. I built every explanation that fit a species fighting for survival. A contamination attempt. Supply chain confusion from a third-party operation. An accident of logistics. None of them held when I tested them against the precision of the nutritional calibration. Accidents do not produce data correct to the 4th decimal point. I opened the pending file. Extinction Index entry for humanity. 28 words. Blinking cursor. I deleted 3 more words. 25. I did not know why I kept reducing the entry instead of completing it. Every professional instinct said to add data. But every word I tried to add came out wrong. Every classification I attempted returned a partial match and then redirected me to a category that did not exist in the index. The system kept asking me the same prompt. Create new category. I had dismissed it 11 times. I dismissed it again. Closed the file. Pulled up the navigational display and watched the Earth system growing in the charts as the fleet moved forward. 39 hours to Earth. I stood at the observation deck in the dark and looked at the stars sliding past. 847 closed entries in the index behind me. 1 open file ahead. An open file that had been feeding my fleet protein rations while I was trying to write its obituary. I told myself Earth would provide the remaining data and the entry would close cleanly when I arrived. I said this to myself several times with reasonable confidence. I almost fully believed it. Earth was quiet from orbit in a way that no planet had ever been quiet when my fleet arrived. 37 Dravik warships came out of transit formation above a blue and green world and the planet looked up with all its lights on. No planetary defense grid activated. No emergency transponders launched. No distress signals opened on any frequency. The electromagnetic band produced nothing that read as a military preparation. The cities on the night side of the planet were lit from edge to edge, steady and uninterrupted, as if the arrival of 37 warships was a scheduled event someone had put on a calendar. I had made approach above 847 worlds. Not one of them had looked like this. Thrashcovel reported the atmospheric readings as nominal. I noted this and said nothing. 17 Galactic Council vessels had followed us from a careful distance and were now holding position at the outer edge of the system, which was as close as they were willing to come while still claiming they were present. Their communication channels were open and very busy. I could read the traffic volume without decrypting it. Panic has a transmission frequency that is recognizable in any language. Then 1 human shuttle launched from the surface. 1. No escort. No formation. A single craft, small enough that my least experienced weapons officer could have removed it from the tactical display by pressing the wrong console button without meaning to. It rose out of the atmosphere on a direct intercept course with my flagship and did not slow and did not announce any credentials and did not request permission to approach. The council vessels went quiet. Thrashcovel reported 1 occupant. I told him to open the docking channel. The shuttle docked. I met it at the airlock. The person who walked out was a human female with short dark hair and a carry bag over one shoulder. The bag appeared to contain a personal water container and possibly a change of clothing. She was wearing a jacket with a small insignia I did not immediately recognize. Her rank, when I ran the translation, came back as Specialist, Xenocultural Liaison, which was a title so precisely bureaucratic that it nearly circled back around to being interesting. She looked at me without stepping back. The Dravik are not a small species. Most beings who look directly at a Dravik for the first time do one of three things. They step back. They say something that does not make grammatical sense. Or they reach for whatever they have that functions as a weapon. She said, "Did the protein rations reach you?" I looked at her. She said, "Year 3. We were not certain the transfer point would hold the routing correctly. The ion ratios on batch 7 were slightly off and we did not know whether you would detect the variance." I said, "The ratios were not off." She said, "We believe the iron content was low by a small margin." I said, "The iron content was correct to 3 decimal points." She said, "We were aiming for 4. There was a silence that was longer than any silence I had shared with a non-Dravik species. She introduced herself. Her name was Nora Aldrich. She told me she had been assigned to my arrival for the past 3 years, which meant someone on Earth had been certain enough that I would come to begin preparation 3 years before I ever received the transmission. I filed this under the same growing folder where I had been storing things that did not fit any existing category. She said she had 2 things to show me on the surface and she wanted to begin before the council delegations did something that would make the afternoon more complicated for everyone. I told Thrashcovel to hold the fleet in position and accept no outside communications until I returned. He paused. His third pause in as many days, which was more pausing than the prior 40 years combined. I told him to hold the fleet anyway. He did. The descent to the surface took 20 minutes. Nora sat across from me in the shuttle and did not fill the time with nervous conversation. She opened a small notebook and wrote in it with a script I did not recognize as any galactic standard language. I eventually identified it as an Earth regional personal script, informal, written with the ease of long practice. I asked what she was writing. She said, "Observations. I have been keeping records of this contact since the planning stage." I asked how long the planning had been running. She said, 43 years. The project started before first contact with your fleet. Before we knew for certain you existed. I looked out the window at the surface coming up below us and did not respond. The planet, seen from low altitude, was not what my tactical imaging had prepared me to find. Cities, yes. Infrastructure, yes. All the expected markers of a civilization that had survived long enough to build things worth recording. But also a quantity of what I had no category for. Green spaces arranged inside the cities, not outside them. Structures built with no apparent functional purpose beyond being looked at. Roads that curved around geographic features instead of cutting through them. Nora took me to a building in a city whose name I could not immediately pronounce. A low building, older than the structures surrounding it, with large windows that let the light run deep into the interior. Inside, shelves and screens and data storage systems extending further than the front room suggested was possible. She said, "This is the Xenocultural Archive. We have been building it for 43 years. I said, "A library." She said, "Yes. Specifically, a library about you." She brought me to a terminal and showed me the index. 43 years of records. Organized not by military data but by behavioral study. Social patterns. Cultural analysis. Historical reconstruction going as far back as the available data allowed. Every Dravik engagement in observable range, studied not for tactical exploitation but for what it revealed about Dravik decision-making, Dravik values, Dravik history. Someone had spent 4 decades attempting to understand what the Dravik wanted and why we operated the way we operated. Not how to defeat us. What we were. I stood at that terminal for a long time. I opened the oldest file in the archive. A founding document. A statement of purpose dated before any human vessel had encountered Dravik technology. Before anyone on Earth knew what we looked like. Written by people who had found the shape of 847 absent civilizations in the star charts and decided their response was not to build a defense grid but to build a record. The last line of the document was written in standard galactic script, the universal translation layer, and it said, "If they come for us, we want to know them first. We want to know if it matters to them that we tried. We want them to know someone looked." I stepped back from the terminal. In one corner of the archive room there was a plant in a ceramic pot. Green. Healthy. Unremarkable in every measurable respect. I stood and examined it for several minutes. I noted the density of the soil. I noted the angle of the light from the nearest window. I noted the size of the leaves relative to the diameter of the pot. Nora stood behind me and did not ask what I was doing. I went back to the terminal. I read the founding document again. Then I opened the index entry for humanity on my personal console. 25 words now. A cursor that had nothing to wait for. I deleted 5 more words. 20. Nora asked if I was ready to see the second thing. I said yes. She took me to Iceland. Iceland was a landmass in Earth's northern region with a geological personality that expressed itself through cold air, volcanic rock, and steam rising thin and steady from cracks in the ground. The sky was a gray so consistent it looked like something someone had installed on purpose. The ground was black stone, old and patient. We walked 15 minutes from the transport point before I saw it. The structure was not large. For what it turned out to be, it should have been enormous. A low wall of dark volcanic stone, rough-cut and unpolished, set into the earth at the end of a narrow valley where the steam came up through the ground in quiet, steady columns. Perhaps 40 meters long. Not impressive by any architectural standard I had encountered in 6,000 years. I walked closer. The wall was covered in Dravic death notation. I stopped moving. Dravic death notation is not written language in the way most species understand writing. It is a symbolic grammar developed over thousands of years for the specific purpose of recording fallen warriors. The notation carries information about identity, rank, the nature of the engagement, and the precise honorific formula that closes the record of a Dravic life according to our cultural tradition. It cannot be learned from a reference document. You learn it from other Dravic, in the context of using it, across a long period of time. Every symbol on this wall was correct. Not approximately correct. Not a reasonable approximation produced by someone working from partial information. Correct. Every honorific in the right position. Every closing glyph accurate in its form. I walked to the beginning of the wall and I started reading. The names were of Dravic warriors from my fleet. Every vessel I had lost across 11 years of war. Every crew member my own records confirmed had not returned. All of them recorded here in the full notation of our tradition, on the volcanic stone of a world we had been advancing toward. Humanity had been keeping our dead. Nora walked 3 meters behind me and said nothing. I moved along the wall and read every entry. I checked each one against my internal records as I went. The accuracy was complete. Every detail was correct. Whoever had produced this notation had known not just the names but the specific honorific categories, the rank symbols, the glyph forms that distinguish different types of loss. This was knowledge that could not be assembled from external observation. It required a source close to the Dravic tradition. I reached the end of the wall. There was one final entry. I did not recognize the name. The notation placed him as a subordinate commander, tactical rank, early period of the war. I ran the name against my fleet records twice. No match. No record of this warrior existed in any file I held. I asked Nora who this was. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that carries weight. She said, "He came to us in year 6. Alone. He said the war was wrong and he wanted to help us understand the Dravic well enough to end it without destroying you. He worked with the archive team for 3 years. He died here, on Earth, at the end of year 9. He refused to return. Under Dravic law, a warrior who defects to an enemy during active conflict is a traitor. The notation applicable to a traitor removes all honorifics. Their name is not recorded in the death notation at all. They are removed from the record entirely, as if they had never served. His name was on this wall. With full honorifics. with the correct closing glyph of a warrior who had died in service of something he believed in. I said, he was a traitor under our law. Nora said, he was Dravik. And he was brave. And he is dead. And being dead is the one thing none of us has a side about. I read the entry 3 more times. Then I walked back to the beginning of the wall and started from the first name again. Nora sat down on a flat piece of rock a short distance away and waited. She wrote in her notebook. She did not rush me or check how long I was taking. I walked the wall a second time, and a third, and she was still writing quietly when I finished. By the third pass I understood something I had not known when I arrived in this valley. The archive, the nutrition canisters routed to my fleet during the war, the 11 words sent in Dravik cipher, and this wall were not separate decisions. They were one continuous decision that humanity had been making for 43 years. The decision was to know us. Not to use that knowledge for advantage. Not to trade it for survival at a better price. To know us because someone had found 847 absences in the star charts and decided the correct response to that information was not to prepare a defense but to preserve a record of what had been lost and to understand what had ended it. The classification error in my index entry was getting worse, not better. The news about the wall reached the council vessels at the edge of the system before Nora and I returned to the transport. I monitored the transmission traffic. The response was fast and not measured. 13 species submitted formal protests through the council's diplomatic relay. The arguments arrived in clusters. The first argued that building memorials for Dravik warriors legitimized the Dravik campaign and showed disrespect for the civilizations that had been destroyed. The second argued that a species willing to honor enemies was strategically unpredictable and could not be trusted within a post-war alliance. The third argument arrived last, written in the coldest and most legally precise language of all the three. If humanity established a precedent of memorializing enemies, then every species the Dravik had ever erased became a question of record. 847 civilizations, each one now potentially requiring documentation, acknowledgement, a wall somewhere. The council had been managing the silence of those 847 absences for a long time. That silence had political value. A wall in Iceland changed the terms of that silence in ways the council was not prepared to manage. Nora received the formal statement from the council relay as we stood outside the transport. She read it. She sent one reply back to the relay. 4 words. Good. We will build them all. The council relay was silent for 11 seconds. I looked at Nora. She said, we already have the names. 43 years of archive work. We know who most of them were. Evening came into the valley. The steam vents caught the low light and turned orange at the edges. The wall went dark, the notation fading into the stone as the light left it. Nora sat near me and neither of us spoke for a long time, which was, I was learning, one of the more unusual things about her. Most beings filled silence in the presence of a Dravik. She used it the same way the Dravik used it. I asked her the question I had been building toward since the archive. I said, what did you expect to receive in return for all of this? She thought about it. She did not hurry the answer. She considered it for long enough that I found myself respecting the pause. She said, nothing. We just kept doing it because we had started. I said, that is not a functional motivation for 43 years of sustained effort. She said, it worked fine for us. I looked at the wall. The last name at the far end, invisible now in the dark. I said, he died far from his fleet. His people would have recorded nothing for him. He would have been removed from the record entirely. She said, we know. That is why he is on the wall. I stood up and told her I needed to return to the fleet. She nodded and did not ask when I was coming back. I sent a message to Thrashkovil from the transport as we lifted out of the valley. 3 words. Extended survey. Holding. He sent back a single piece of notation that did not exist in the Dravik communication system and therefore could not have been a formal response. It was a question mark. He had invented a symbol specifically to ask me something that had no existing response format. I did not reply to the question mark. I opened the index entry for humanity. 20 words. Cursor blinking. I deleted 3 more words. 17. I saved the file and went back to the flagship. The document was called Galactic Council Resolution 7 Terminus, and I read it in under a minute, which was not long enough to fully process what it was designed to accomplish. I read it again more carefully. It was a legal reclassification proceeding. The structure of the argument was clean. The language was precise. Whoever had drafted it had done skilled, disciplined work, and I acknowledged that fact even as I understood what the document was for. The resolution proposed reclassifying the Dravik not as a civilization under galactic legal standing but as a weapon system. A military instrument without sovereign status. Under this classification, the Dravik would lose the right to hold territory, enter treaties, or act in legal defense of any recognized party. Under this classification, extinction proceedings could be initiated by council majority vote without the standard 7-year diplomatic review period required for all recognized civilizations. The resolution had been in preparation since year 2 of the war. They had been writing it while we were winning. I sat at my command console and processed this. The Dravik have ended many civilizations. I have personally overseen 847 of them. I am not a being withstanding to be outraged at the concept of civilizational elimination. I understand the logic. I have executed the logic more times than any other individual in the recorded history of this galaxy. I was having a feeling for which I did not have a word. Nora arrived on my flagship the next morning. She did not wait for an invitation. She came off the transport and walked to the command deck and put a vote count on my secondary console. 18 council member species. Resolution required a 2/3 majority to pass. Current count, 13 in favor. 4 abstaining. 1 opposed. The single opposing vote was humanity's. I looked at the numbers and then I looked at her. She said, "The vote closes in 7 days." I said, "Why 7 days?" She said, "Because 7 days ago we sent you the transmission. The council understands why you are here. They need the vote to close before you can act on the reason you came." I said, "Tell me the reason." She sat down across from me and she told me about Sergeant Clara Webb. Year 1 of the war. A human forward base in the deep engagement zone, operating as a logistics point far outside the Earth system. My fleet's advance team had reached it as part of the opening campaign. The base had no tactical value beyond its location. Standard procedure was to close it and continue. The advance team arrived. The base personnel evacuated. Most of them made it out. One did not evacuate with the others. Sergeant Clara Webb was the medical officer assigned to the base. She had been completing a medical procedure when the evacuation order was issued. She stayed to finish it. When the last evacuation craft cleared the range, she was still at the base alone. The advance team found her there. They also found, in the supply storage area of the base, a Dravik warrior from a prior engagement. Wounded. Separated from his unit. Entering systemic biological failure, the kind of cascading shutdown my species experiences when cut off from fleet communications for an extended period. He had been in that storage bay for 9 days. Clara Webb had been treating him. She was a field medic. She had found a wounded living creature within her medical jurisdiction and she had done what she was trained to do. She had been treating him for 9 days alone in a base with no reference material on Dravik biology, using only the data she could gather through direct observation, because no human medical database at that point in the war contained information about our species. When the advance team arrived, she stood between them and the wounded warrior and told them he was under medical care. The advance team left them both where they were. The Dravik warrior's name was Voreshkelen. Subordinate Fleet Commander, Tactical Division. He had served under my command for 12 years before year 1. I had been part of the cohort that trained his command group in the early period of his service. Clara Webb kept him alive through the full systemic failure event. When he could speak again, he asked her why she had done it. She told him she had taken an oath when she began her medical training. The oath required her to provide care to those who needed it. The oath did not have a species requirement written into it. She said it was not a complicated decision. It was just an oath that did not have exceptions built into it. Voreshkelen recovered and returned to the fleet in year 1. He served through year 4. He died in a different engagement, in a system 12 light-years from the base where Clara Webb had kept him alive. Before he died, he recorded a life debt. In Dravik death notation. The formal kind. The kind that transfers across generations and cannot be dissolved except by deliberate settlement. He recorded that a life debt was owed by the Dravik, collectively and in full, to the species known as humanity. He did not name an individual creditor. He named a species. Nora showed me the recording. Voreshkelen's notation, transmitted through a captured data relay in year 4, forwarded to a frequency that Earth had been monitoring since the beginning of the war. They had been watching for this. They had been monitoring every frequency they could access, waiting for something like this to arrive, because they understood Dravik cultural law well enough to know that if this moment ever came, it would come in exactly this form. I looked at the notation for a long time. The glyph forms were correct. The honorific structure was accurate. The life debt recording was legally binding under every layer of Dravik cultural law going back to the founding period. I said, he recorded a life debt to an entire species. Nora said, we needed to know if that was binding. I said, it is binding. Under Dravik law, a recorded life debt of this category obligates the debtor species to act in defense of the creditor against an existential threat. The debt does not expire. It does not weaken over time. It does not require the original debtor to be living. It passes to the whole. The Council had known about this debt since year 4. They had been building Resolution 7 Terminus for 3 years before the war ended. The ceasefire was not the conclusion of the conflict. The ceasefire was the transition to a different phase of it. The phase where legal instruments replaced military ones. If the reclassification passed before the debt could be honored, a weapon system had no standing to enter a legal defense obligation. A weapon system had no legal standing of any kind. The debt would be nullified not by being settled but by the debtor being reclassified out of the legal category required to honor it. 7 days until the vote closed. I said, you called us here to tell us before it was too late to act. Nora said, we called you here because you were owed the information. Voreshkelen recorded the debt with full knowledge of what he was building. He knew we would have to send for you. He built the mechanism before he died. I said, he built you a call for help that could only be answered voluntarily. She said, he built you a reason. I sat back from the console. I went to Voreshkelen's personnel file and read it from beginning to end for the first time. The last entry was addressed to the fleet commander. To me. In Dravik personal notation, not military format. Informal. The equivalent of a letter. He said he had met a species that did not know how to flinch. That he had looked for fear in Clara Webb's eyes while she kept him alive through 9 days of systemic failure and had not found it. He said he did not know what to do with that. He said he hoped I would figure it out. He said he was leaving me a direction and he was sorry he could not be there to see where it went. I closed the file. I opened the extinction index entry. 17 words. The create new category prompt blinking alongside the cursor. I accepted the prompt. The system asked for a name. I left the name blank. I did not have the right word yet. I filed humanity under an unnamed category and saved the entry. 17 words. Blank category field. Cursor still waiting. Then I opened the fleet-wide channel. All 37 vessels. I said, we have a debt to close. I did not explain. The Dravik do not require explanation when a debt is named. A debt is not a suggestion. A debt is weight that pulls at everything in its direction until it is settled. Thrashkovil gave the signal to the fleet without asking me a single question. 37 warships began moving into approach formation. Below us, on Earth, the planetary emergency systems activated across every city as the orbital detection grid registered 37 warships changing position. The alert broadcasts ran on every frequency. I transmitted to Nora, turn off the alarms. 11 seconds. Her reply, done. And for what it is worth, thank you. I did not have a response structure for that. I filed it under the blank category with everything else that had been accumulating there for days. I told Thrashkovil to set course for the Council station. He set the course without pausing. That was new. The Council station was a hollow structure placed in a dead system outside every claimed territory. No nearby inhabited worlds. No jurisdiction disputes. It suited diplomatic neutrality because it suited nothing else. My fleet dropped out of transit in a ring around it. In 847 entries, I had used that ring formation once, at each world that ended. The Council vessels that had followed us from Earth held position and stopped moving. All 18 communication channels opened simultaneously. I let them transmit. Nora's shuttle was already docked. She had departed Earth 4 hours before my fleet and had used the time to contact a human legal specialist in galactic treaty interpretation named Owen Park. Owen Park was a compact man who carried a substantial amount of organized legal information and the energy of someone who had been holding a prepared argument in place for a very long time and had just been told the moment had arrived. He met me at the airlock with a data tablet and said, without any preamble, that he had filed for floor access under Article 14 of the Council Charter. Article 14 granted any party directly affected by a resolution the right to address the chamber before the vote was cast. He had filed the argument that we qualified. He had been preparing it for 31 months. The Council's legal committee reviewed the request for 45 minutes. During those 45 minutes I stood in the corridor outside the chamber. The committee was determining whether a species that was the subject of a resolution counted as a party affected by it. The distinction was doing an enormous amount of work in a very small legal space. Floor access was granted. Procedurally. By a vote of 11 to 7. The 7 who voted against it had done the same calculation as the vessels above Earth. Some risks carry their own category of consequence. Being the first species to formally deny the Dravik the floor was one of those risks. Even Species 203 was not willing to have that recorded against their name. I entered the chamber. 18 delegations in the tiered seating arranged in a semicircle. Every species I had encountered in the course of the war or its political aftermath. Some of them with entries already filed. Some of them alive only because they had surrendered before I reached their positions. Species 441 had offered me their third moon during the transit intercept above Earth and appeared to have forgotten that I owned it through right of conquest. I recognized all of them. None of them looked comfortable. Owen Park was at a side table with his data tablet and 31 months of prepared legal arguments. He was ready to deploy any of them at a signal from me. I took the floor. I did not open with the life debt mechanism. I did not cite the resolution's procedural vulnerabilities. I did not describe the weapon capacity of the fleet currently positioned in a ring around the station, which was information every delegation in the chamber already had and had been attempting not to think about since I arrived. I told them about a valley in Iceland. I told them about a wall of volcanic stone 40 meters long, covered in Dravik death notation so precisely accurate that I had walked its full length 3 times to confirm it was not a reproduction. The names on that wall were names from my fleet. Names of Dravik warriors who had died fighting the species that built the wall. I told them that at the far end of the wall there was one more name. A name that Dravik law required to be removed from all records permanently. A name that was on the wall anyway, with full honorifics and the correct closing glyph, because the species that built the wall had looked at a dead warrior who had chosen a different path and decided he was Dravik and brave and dead and that those 3 things together were sufficient. I told them about an archive running for 43 years. A library built before first contact, before anyone on Earth had confirmed that the Dravik existed, built because someone had found the shape of 847 absences in the star charts and decided the correct response was not to prepare weapons but to preserve understanding. Not to survive us. To know us. I told them about nutrition canisters routed into my supply chain during active conflict. Calibrated to Dravik biology with a precision that required years of careful study. Delivered through channels that had no business knowing my fleet's position. I told them that while I was writing an extinction index entry for humanity, humanity had been quietly keeping my fleet fed. I told them about Clara Webb. A field medic who found a wounded Dravik warrior in her medical jurisdiction and spent 9 days alone keeping him alive using nothing but observation and the terms of an oath she had taken that did not contain a species exception. I told them that Voreshkelen, the warrior she saved, had served under my command for 12 years. That I had received his casualty report in year 4 and filed it without reading his final personnel record. That the last thing he had written, addressed to me directly, said he had met a species that did not know how to flinch and that he was leaving me a direction and he was sorry he could not be there to see where it pointed. I told them I had been writing an extinction index entry for humanity for 11 years. That the entry currently contained 17 words and a blank category field. I said, I have 47 categories. 847 entries. 6,000 years of complete, accurate, closed documentation. I cannot close this entry. I have been unable to close it since year 8 of the war. Every classification I attempt returns a partial match and then redirects me to a category that does not exist in the index. The system asks me each time if I want to create a new category. I declined that prompt 11 times. I paused. I said, I accepted it 2 days ago. The chamber was very quiet. I said, you are attempting to resolve this by removing the subject. I understand the impulse well. When a classification system cannot file something correctly, removal appears to be a solution. The anomaly disappears. The system returns to what looks like normal operation. I said, I am the foremost expert in the recorded history of this galaxy on the subject of removal. I have removed 847 subjects from the record. I know exactly what it does and does not accomplish. I said, removal does not fix the taxonomy. It leaves a gap in the record shaped exactly like the thing you removed, and that gap will remain for as long as the record runs. The system does not return to normal operation. It returns to a version of normal operation that has a permanent absence in it, shaped precisely like what you took out, and future civilizations will look at that absence and ask what you were afraid of. I looked at the 18 delegations. I said, you are about to create a gap in the history of this galaxy shaped like a species that built memorials for the armies trying to destroy them and called it the natural thing to do. That gap will not close. You will be filing it under things we chose to remove for the rest of this galaxy's recorded history, and every civilization that comes after you will look at that filing and understand exactly what kind of species did the removing. I said, vote however you need to vote. But understand what you are voting on. You are not removing a threat from the record. You are removing the only species in the documented history of this galaxy that looked at us and decided we were worth understanding. I said, look carefully at what that says about the rest of you. I yielded the floor. Owen Park was on his feet before I had fully turned away. He had a legal filing ready and the look of someone releasing a pressure that had been building for 31 months. He began presenting and I left him to it. He was very good at his work. He did not need me in the room. I went back to the corridor. Nora had a comm unit open, patched through to the valley in Iceland via a relay point she had arranged before we left Earth. It was early morning there. The valley visible in the gray pre-dawn light, the steam coming up thin and straight from the ground, the wall at the far end still in shadow. I stood and watched it through the feed. The vote took 3 hours. Council procedure required a formal recess after floor statements, then deliberation in private session, then a recorded roll call. Owen Park filed 4 procedural challenges during the deliberation period, each requiring additional review time. I had not asked him to do this. He had planned it independently, because that was the kind of person he was and because 2 years of preparation builds a momentum of its own. Nora sat beside me in the corridor. We did not speak. The comm feed to the valley remained open. The wall slowly emerged from the shadow as the sun came up over the edge of the valley. Thrashcovel sent 1 data packet from the fleet. No text. 1 question mark. I sent back, holding. The roll call result arrived through the council relay as a data transmission. Owen Park forwarded it to Nora the moment it came through. She looked at her comm unit and turned the screen so I could see it. The number was 6. 6 in favor of Resolution 7 Terminus. Down from 13. The resolution had failed. I held the number in my attention for a moment. 6 species, having heard everything I had said and reviewed the debt documentation and 43 years of archive records, had still voted to proceed. I noted their index numbers. I filed the information. The other 12 had changed their position. I turned back to the valley feed. The wall was in full morning light now. The notation clear and sharp against the dark stone. I found the section of the wall where Voreshkalen's name was recorded. I had memorized its position on my 3rd walk through the valley. I thought about him dying in year 4 in a system 12 light-years from a supply bay where a human medic had kept him alive without any reference material and without any expectation of benefit to herself. I thought about him writing a letter to me from his final personnel record with the informal notation of a person speaking to someone they had served, not the formal notation of a soldier filing a final report. He had said he was leaving me a direction. I looked at the far end of the wall where the last entry stood. I straightened and I said the name correctly. In Dravic Death Notation phonetics, formal register, the three-syllable sequence of the closing glyph that ends a life debt record in our tradition. The syllables that mean received and honored and closed. I said it for Voreshkelen and for Clara Webb and for 9 days in a supply bay that neither of them had expected to produce any consequence at all. The debt was closed. Nora closed the valley feed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked what came next. For the Dravic. After today. What direction came next? I said I did not know. She asked whether that was uncomfortable. I thought about the question honestly. I said, the Dravic have always operated with a defined direction. A target. A file to be closed. I have worked within that structure for 200 years. I do not have language for standing in an open space without a next point assigned. She said, most species learn it. I said, most species started with considerably less momentum behind them. She said, we still have the protein synthesis problem. The iron ratio. Batch 12 still does not match your correct calibration and I have run out of adjustment ideas from our side. I could use your input on the variable. I looked at her. She said, it is a small reason to stay. I know. I said, small reasons accumulate. She said, they do. I opened the extinction index entry for humanity on my personal console. 17 words. A blank category name field. A cursor that had been blinking for 11 years across the full span of a war and everything that came after it. I read the 17 words one final time. They described something along its edges. They traced the shape of what humanity was by marking what was around it. 17 words that had spent 11 years refusing to be the right words because the right words did not exist in any language the Dravic had accumulated across 6,000 years of operation. I looked at the blank category name field. I built a word. The Dravic language is old enough that building a new word requires combining stable roots with care. The roots carry weight that extends back thousands of years and combining them incorrectly produces something that means nothing. I took 3 roots that the language had not placed together before and I tested each combination until they resolved into something that held its own weight and meant what I needed it to mean. The word I built meant, the act of being known by something that had no reason to know you. I typed it into the category field. I saved the entry. 17 words. 1 new category name. The status field still showed incomplete. I left the status as incomplete. For the first time across 847 entries, incomplete felt like the correct status. Not an error to be resolved. Not a failure of the index. Incomplete because the subject was still present. Still doing things that required new words to describe. Still producing data that the existing system could not file without building new space for it. An open file on a living civilization. I closed the console. I went to find Nora so she could show me the protein synthesis records. The station corridor was empty and quiet. In the navigation display above me, 37 Dravic vessels held position around the station in the same ring formation I had used to close 847 worlds. No vector assigned. No target. No direction. The first time in 200 years my fleet had been somewhere without a defined next point. I noted the coordinates, the time, the current index status, and everything else my training required me to note. The Dravic are always thorough. And then I noted one more thing. There was a folder on my command console I had created during the first transit to Earth, when I did not have a name for the accumulation of things that were building up outside every existing category. The bread smell in a city. A plant in a ceramic pot in a library corner. The feel of volcanic stone resonating underfoot in a valley. Nora's silence, which worked the same way Dravic's silence worked. The question mark that Thrashkovil had invented specifically to ask a question that had no existing format. The folder had been labeled unclassified because I had not yet found the right word for what it contained. I renamed it now. I used the Dravic word for a sound without a visible source. The resonance that stays in a stone long after the voice that made it is gone. The frequency that only registers if you have learned to listen for it, and that changes the way you hear everything else once you have. I saved the folder under that name. I walked toward the docking bay where Nora was waiting with the protein synthesis data and the iron ratio problem and whatever other small reasons were going to accumulate before the day ended. Behind me, 37 vessels held position in a dead system outside every claimed territory. No direction assigned. All the time available to find one. The index entry for humanity stayed open in the pending file. It had always been pending. It occurred to me, walking down that corridor, that pending did not mean unfinished. It meant ongoing. I filed that thought under the new folder name. I kept walking.